Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and welcome to part 5 of our review/overview for Mongoose Traveller 2nd Edition. In a previous episode, we made our character Jack Miller, and we've gone over the basics as far as how skill mechanics work, so now we're ready to begin looking at ship operations. The spaceship becomes an integral part of many science fiction stories, whether that be the Millennium Falcon, the Bebop, Serenity, or Battlestar Galactica. The ship serves as more than just a setting, but often becomes a character themselves. They're the homes to the characters who often step inside and close the airlock, and when they open it up again, step out into a new world full of exciting new adventures. So that's what we're going to talk about, spaceships and how they work in the Traveller universe. Now, I won't be discussing trade or space combat in this episode. We'll cover those in later videos. This is just the foundations for ships and ship rules. So first, let's look at ships. Traveller ships come in 3 categories, which are based off of size. Small craft, which are ships under 100 tons and therefore not jump capable. Spacecraft, which are ships that are over 100 tons and most likely going to be the size that the players will be using in your game. And then capital ships, which are over 5,000 tons or more, and they can get a lot more than 5,000. These are what you're going to usually find in more of your naval campaigns with, gigantic ships with large crews, while in most Traveller games they're probably going to be some sort of, imperial ship that our plucky heroes have to escape from. Many people get confused with the term ton when it comes to ships, confusing that for the physical weight of the ship. Ship tons are not weight, but displacement. How many tons of liquid hydrogen the ship displaces, roughly a volume of 14 cubic meters a ton. The core book gives us a good selection of ships, but unfortunately none of these are capital ships. We get even more and several capital ships in High Guard, as well as rules for building and customizing our own ships. And while I do love the sort of 3D isometric deck plans that really help visualize the layout of the ship, I find isometric maps really difficult to translate into a 2-dimensional board. Thankfully, Mongoose also gave us 2D deck plans, which you can download for free on their website, and these are what I use in-game. I've stuck a link below as to where you can download the 2D deck plans, and I find them very useful to use as maps. So how do you get a ship? Well, the most obvious way is to pay for one, but they are expensive. Mind-blowingly expensive. A standard free trader, one of the most popular ships in the game, has a price tag of over 45 million credits. However, financing is available and travelers can make monthly payments like you would on a car or a house mortgage, so you simply divide the purchase price by 240, which becomes your monthly payment over the course of 40 years, and this ship would have a payment of 189,000 credits a month. Wow, 40 years? The bank's got a better view of my character's life expectancy than I do. However, that's just one way of getting a ship. Another way is through benefits. If you remember, during character creation, players get to roll various benefits when they're mustering out, and you can get a ship's boat or other small craft worth up to 10 million credits free and clear. Oddly enough, this benefit caps out at tech level 12 craft, and while we do get a great selection of different small craft to choose from, the only one that doesn't fit the guidelines is the ship's boat itself, which is tech level 13. I think this is just a miscalculation because the ship's boat that appears in the High Guard book is identical, except that it shows at tech level 12 and is a little bit cheaper and has a half-ton more cargo space available. Other than that, I don't see any difference between them, so just ignore the tech level 13 on the core book ship boat and go ahead and use that if one of your players rolls up that benefit and they say, yeah, I'd love to have a ship's boat. Our character Jack Miller got a free scout ship among his benefits, though it's more of a permanent loan than private property, but hey, a free 100-ton spacecraft is pretty good. Other benefits include 3 other ships, though with these it's only a 25% ownership, and that's 25% for each time the character rolls this particular benefit. So it could be a 50% or 75 or even 100% ownership, depending on how many times they rolled that particular benefit. Players can say that's either how much has already been paid off through monthly payments, and they just keep making the normal monthly payments as if they had financed the total amount of the ship, saying, well, hey, I've only got a few years left. or they can go ahead and reduce that amount from the initial purchase price of the ship and then calculate what their 40-year payment is based off that, thus earning them a much lower payment. There's also ship shares, which are sort of like stocks, each share being worth 1 million credits toward a ship. Now, this area does cause some confusion with players. What happens if 2 or more travelers roll up separate ships that they each have 25% of? Or how do we spin ship shares? But it's all pretty simple. If 2 or more characters roll up a ship, only one is allowed to have it at the start of the campaign, so those players can debate amongst themselves, who it is and which ship it is. So let's say a character rolled up owning 25% of a free trader, and another rolled up owning a yacht. They get to choose which ship the group has. The other player gets to keep their ship, they just don't have it on them. It's a 25% ownership of a separate ship, which is earning them an annual pension of 25,000 credits a year as it's flying around the galaxy doing various jobs on its own. Personally, I'd also allow for an ownership transfer, so if 2 characters rolled up during their mustering out that each of them had a different ship, such as a free trader and a yacht, I'd let them move that to one of the other ships if they like, saying that each character owns 25% of the free trader, if that's what they want to say, instead of saying it's 2 separate ships. Or if a game master doesn't want to start them off with either ship, maybe because they're planning on starting them off shipless for their campaign, or planning on giving them a ship as part of a separate adventure, they can easily just look at their players and say, hey, both of you guys own a major stake in a ship that's out there earning you 25 grand a year. You just don't have possession of it. With ship shares, like with the 25% ownership, you can reduce the total purchase price of a ship by that amount, in this case 1 million per share, and then finance the rest. Or you can save up your ship shares, acting like an investment in a different ship that's out there somewhere, earning the traveler an annual pension of 1,000 credits a year. Another way of reducing the price of a ship is just by buying a used ship, and most of the ships that travelers get while mustering out are going to be used. And like with cars, the sticker price does go down depending on age. Travelers roll on this chart, determining the age of their ship and the appropriate discount for it. However, older ships have some quirks, and the older the ship, the more quirks it can have. Quirks can be good or bad. It might be a busted sensor suite, giving a minus to use the sensors, or the ship might have been upgraded in some way. Travelers can of course spend some money and effort repairing their old ship once the game begins, but we'll get to repairs later on in this video. But there is one house rule that I employ, and I totally stole this from the Pirates of DRINAX campaign. But if the travelers start their game off with an older ship and one of the other players has some ship shares available, such as they've got 5 ship shares and the old ship has some quirks to it, they can just remove those quirks at a 1-for-1 basis by trading in some ship shares. So in that case, you got 3 quirks on the ship, a traveler can spend 3 of their ship shares, and those 3 quirks have been taken care of. It's just kind of a neat little thing we can do to cancel it out. I wouldn't necessarily employ this in every game that I run, just depending on what that game's going to be, but it is an option out there, so I'm just going to throw that out for any game masters that might want to use that. Now, of course, travelers making payment on their ship might miss a payment from time to time, either because they're strapped for cash or because they just don't want to keep paying. If so, there is a chance that the title owner might come looking for them and send some sort of skip tracer out to either collect that payment or collect the ship. It might get impounded at a starport someplace or cost the travelers potential jobs as they find themselves being hunted by these different skip tracers. Or you can have an adventure where your characters are the repo teams, hunting down various crews that defaulted in their loans. Scott Brown in space! Another thing to think about is who owns the title to the ship. Who is it the travelers are making their payments to? It could easily be some bank or some corporation somewhere, but it could also be a crime lord that they're paying off for the ship. And maybe that crime boss shows up from time to time and sort of pressures the PCs into taking some job, that they don't want to do, either in exchange for a few payments or as a penalty for maybe they're missing a payment before and now they got to do this sketchy job. Of course, the other way the crew could get a ship is through piracy. Space pirates are a thing. Or they could salvage one or have a ship fall into their laps like the Rocinante in The Expanse. The Traveler Companion also gives us rules on altering a ship's transponder, just like the Rossi's crew did. Game masters could simply give their group a ship if they like, or give them access to a ship. Many adventures out there, such as High and Dry, have getting a ship be the prize for the adventure, and that can make for a great intro to a campaign, as the traveler's first mission is to secure their starship. Yeah, getting a ship in Traveller ain't no big deal, and too many new game masters and players needlessly worry about that part, completely ignoring the important question. What is it they do once they got it? Okay, so let's talk about what makes up a ship in Traveller, starting with the maneuver drive, or just the M drive for short. These are your basic thrusters that move the ship around in orbit or through space. These work through gravity drives and are measured in thrust, which each point of thrust equals 1g of continuous acceleration. For example, Jack's scout ship has a thrust speed of 2. The M drive consumes power from the ship's engines, but no additional fuel above what the reactors normally require just to operate the ship. Now, starships are extremely fast, but space is also extremely huge. So huge that it becomes difficult for a lot of people to really appreciate how big space is, especially with a lifetime of movies and books and shows that look like you could zip between Earth and Jupiter in just a couple minutes. The book gives us transit times of how long it would take for a ship to travel different distances at different speeds. For example, at their closest point, Earth is roughly 600 million kilometers from Jupiter, so a ship traveling at 1g would take 5.5 days to travel that, while a ship that's got a thrust of 5g would take 2.5 days. Now, these transit times include the slowdown time, so the ship accelerates for half the distance, then flips around, turns its thrusters on, and slows down for the second half of the distance. The flip and burn maneuver that those that read or watch The Expanse should be familiar with. For those like me that don't want to calculate the distance between all the different bodies in space, we have this handy cheat sheet chart that shows the distances and travel times for 1 or 2 Gs. Very rarely in my experience do we need to know the exact time it takes to get from one planet to another, or how long it takes to get from the surface to the high port in our games. So unless there's some specific reason that we need to know the exact time, such as we've got a ticking time bomb or something like that, we just hand wave it and say, well, it takes you 3 days to get there, then quickly summarize anything that might have happened during that transit and just get on with the adventure. So players really only need to understand that travel times in system take a lot of time, but don't stress yourself out calculating the exact transit times or exact distances anytime they want to fly somewhere. Next is the jump drive. While the M drive carries us between planets, the J drive is what carries us between the stars. Again, space is huge. This is the Traveller map of chartered space, just a small portion of the Milky Way galaxy. It's divided into sectors, such as this one. This sector here is the Trojan Reach. Each sector is then divided up into 16 subsectors, like this one, which is the Sindal subsector, which you can find in the Traveller core book. Each hex is equal to a parsec, which is about 3.3 light years in size. So depending on the jump drive of the ship, a ship can travel up to 6 parsecs in a single jump. Jack's ship, for example, has a J drive of 2, meaning that it can travel up to 2 parsecs per jump. Jumps always take 148 plus 66 hours to complete, regardless of how far they travel. So with Jack's Jump 2 scout ship, whether he jumps 1 parsec or 2 parsecs or does a micro jump within the same parsec, it still takes roughly a week's time. When a ship enters jump space, it enters a jump bubble, which is a pocket dimension that's cut off from the outside world. Transmissions cannot get in or out, and for the duration of the jump, the travelers are essentially cut off from the entire universe. Jump travel consumes a lot of fuel. For example, Jack's ship has a fuel capacity of 23 tons. But a 1 parsec jump would consume 10 tons of that, and a 2 parsec jump would consume 20 tons of that, meaning Jack's ship will need to refuel after every 2 parsecs that ship jumps. Which means if your characters end up in an empty hex with no possible means to refuel, you might as well just sit back and wait, because you're going to be here a while. Possibly forever. Jump travel is also very sensitive to gravity. In order to jump safely, a ship must be more than 100 diameters away from any object that is larger than the ship. Otherwise, the gravity of that object could disrupt the jump. To put this into perspective, Earth, where you probably are now, is 12,000 kilometers across. So the closest a ship could safely jump from Earth would be 1.2 million kilometers away. That's over 3 times the distance to the Moon. which means that a ship leaving an Earth-sized planet would take about 6 hours at 1G just to reach the safe jump limit before it could jump. Not just that, but the course of the jump can't cross any 100 diameter limits either. So let's say you want to jump your ship to one side of the galaxy from the other, but somewhere in the middle along that straight line is a planet or a star or something like that, and that's just a little bit too close. So what you gotta do is either move your entry point or your exit point, that way it don't cross any of those limits. The procedure to jump requires several steps. First, the ship's astrogator makes a check at difficulty 4 plus the number of parsecs to be traveled. So if they're going 1 parsec, that's 1 plus 4 equals 5 difficulty, or if they're going 2 parsecs, that now makes it a 6 difficulty, etc., etc. Next, depending on the power points that the ship has available, the power might need to be diverted across the ship. Some systems shut down or different lights dim. Finally, the engineer makes a J-drive check at difficulty 4. Now this works as a task chain off the astrogation check. So if the astrogator did well, that means they've got a plus to the J-drive check, or if the astrogator did poorly, that's going to give the engineer a minus. Other factors might be involved as well, such as a poorly maintained jump drives, unrefined fuel, or trying to jump within the 100 diameter limit. If the J-drive check succeeds, then they're going to arrive at their destination in about a week's time. But if not, then that's going to be a misjump. Misjumps can go a lot of different ways depending on how badly the jump roll failed. Maybe they arrive a few days later, or maybe they miss their target by a few 100 million kilometers, or maybe they miss their target by 6 to 36 parsecs, emerging a full system from where they intended to be. Or maybe they're going to spend a subjective eternity in jump space, emerging as no more than a burp of radioactive particles. A bad misjump can seriously ruin your day, or cause your campaign to go spiraling out of control. Or maybe that's the opening to your campaign, the travelers make a bad misjump and now we gotta spend the rest of the campaign just trying to jump our way back home. Sometimes a game master might call for all the different rolls in order to do a jump properly, but just as often a game master might say, hey, the jump goes according to plan, now let's get on with the adventure. So GMs, it's up to you to decide when you want to call for all the jump rolls and all that. Don't feel that you have to make them make the rolls each and every single time they do a mundane jump. There is a lot more we could go into about jumps, but these are just the basic foundation to get players started out. Now, one thing I do want to add is that momentum is carried through jumps. So if your ship is, cruising along at 15,000 kilometers an hour, and then you enter a jump bubble, once you emerge from that jump bubble, you're going to continue moving at the same speed that you went in. However, once you emerge from jump space, you don't necessarily know where you're going to be exactly in relation to everything else, so standard procedure before doing a jump is to slow the ship down and then jump. And then once you get to the other side, you perform a sensor scan, make sure you're not going to bump into anything and see what's there, and then accelerate toward your final destination. There is some good information about jumps in the Journal of the Traveler's Aid Society, Volume 2 and 3. Not essential by any means, but it's some pretty good reading. Next, let's discuss ship duties. There are a lot of roles to be filled on a ship, and a lot of skills are needed. First, of course, is the pilot, someone who flies the ship, and hopefully with a few levels in whatever kind of ship it is. They perform your landings, your dockings, they fly into gas giants to skim for fuel if the ship is streamlined and has some fuel scoops. Most of these are some pretty mundane tasks that are made easier if the pilot takes their time, performing a landing or whatnot. So game masters, you probably shouldn't call for a pilot check each and every time your pilot tries to land at a starport. However, just to get a player familiar with the process of it and the procedure, I'd first ask them to roll a few times they're trying to do these regular tasks, kind of get them used to what it's like, and then you don't have them roll again until some outside variable warrants it needing a roll because now it's no longer mundane. But first few times, I'd go ahead and let them roll. Next is your engineer, or engineers, as many ships require several. In addition to M drives and J drives, which we've already touched on, engineers handle your ship's power, sometimes giving it that extra boost of power, Captain. Or your ship's life support, which is really nice if your character enjoys those little things like gravity, breathing, or not freezing to death. Engineers and mechanics are also who perform repairs on your ship. Repairs, whether they be critical hits or just hull damage, require having spare parts. And how much spare parts just depends on the amount of damage sustained and the roll to repair it. But spare parts is just a generic term. We don't need to specify each and every little part on the ship that might break. Just see how many tons of spare parts you might have. So you should probably have a ton of 2 spare parts on your ship, just in case you get some battle damage, or in case you followed Seth's advice and you let your new pilot do that landing roll and now they failed it and your landing gear is bent. Electronics is your ship communications, your drone operations, and of course your ship sensors. And once again, depending on the size of this ship, might require multiple people to fill all these roles. Your astrogator is your space navigator, and their most obvious role being with jump travel, which you've already covered, but they're also the ones who can plot that in-system course, slingshotting the ship off of a planet or something like that. The gunner is for operating your ship's weapons, if it has them. There are several other roles your ship might need, just depending on what sort of game you're doing. Broker and streetwise are good for securing cargo, both legal and illegal. A ship's steward will help with passengers, and outside of the obvious reasons that your group should have a medic, a ship's medic assists with low passengers that get frozen in cryobursts, which we'll go over all that once we go over cargo and trade in a later video. Of course, a single character might fill multiple roles on a ship. You don't have to have a separate person for each and every role that's out there. And each ship states what an optimal crew requirement for it is, such as Jack's scout ship requires a pilot, an astrogator, or an engineer, but that could also be one person that's got all 3 skills. Now, of course, if you don't have any characters with a particular skill, either because no one rolled one up or nobody wanted the job, you can hire an NPC crewman to fill many of the necessary positions, and the rules give us the average salaries for those positions. There's a few other standard spacecraft features that players should be familiar with. The first being the ship's library. This is a standard program on every ship's computer, and it holds a wealth of information that the travelers might need and serves as a great way for game masters to sort of pass some important information off to the players that they might need for their adventure. So if they're going to a new world that they've never been to before, they can just check the ship's library and they can learn all about it. Its history, its current political climate, its atmosphere, whatever else the game master thinks is important that they should know. Now, because data is limited to the speed of jump space, meaning that if something very important happens 30 parsecs away, even at the fastest ship possible, it's going to take several weeks to possible months before that news comes to wherever the travelers are. There could be a little bit of a delay as far as what the current events are in the ship's library. And while the rules don't say this, I say that any time that a ship docks with a Class A or a Class B, or maybe a Class C starport, that the ship's library sort of just gets an automatic update as to whatever the most current news is that's known at that starport. Think of this thing like the internet aboard your ship. You got your bulletin boards, your space Wikipedia, your instructional videos, and the entirety of Netflix just right there. That can really help pass the time when you're stuck in jump space for a week. Next is the ship's locker. This is a small closet on each ship that carries a bunch of useful items inside. What useful items is up to the game master to decide, but it's usually your standard equipment like your basic vac suits, small arms, armor, tools, or just, this and that. This is meant to simplify bookkeeping. That way the players don't have to keep track of each and every little item on their ship, but it does warn game masters not to let this become something that the players abuse, like some sort of magic box that always has the exact item inside it that they need. But if they're looking for some basic, no-frills gear and equipment, the ship's locker is the answer for them. Next is airlocks. Every ship has at least one airlock, and a standard airlock is big enough to fit 3 characters in vac suits and takes 10 seconds, almost 2 full combat rounds to cycle through, which is a good thing to remember when you have 5 to 6 characters trying to rush out of an airlock at the same time. Airlocks also have a small cache of equipment, sort of a limited ship's locker, if you will, with a couple vac suits, emergency rescue bubbles, small arms like cutlasses, pistols, or shotguns, in case of boarding actions. Airlocks make for great interrogation tools. Nothing encourages a bad guy to spill the beans faster than looking at you through that little airlock window as you're all, "Are you sure that's your final answer?" I should possibly also specify that they're the ones inside the airlock about to get spaced and not you. The other way's not as effective, but sure is hilarious. Aside from the expenses of making your monthly mortgage payments, starships have several costs that travelers need to address. Berthing costs at a starport can get expensive, and the better the port, the higher the price. By the way, I've never found out how often these fees are charged. I go bi-weekly for my games, but it could also just be monthly for all I know. Fuel is another big cost, coming in at 500 credits per ton of refined fuel. Considering that Jack's starship has a fuel capacity of 23 tons, that's over 11,000 credits just to fill the gas tank. And for that reason, crews that have a ship that's been outfitted with fuel processors will often make the multi-day trip out to a gas giant to skim fuel for totally free. For that, the pilot just flies down into the gas giant, finding the appropriate layer, opens up their skimmers, and pulls in all that sweet, sweet free hydrogen. It requires doing a difficulty 10 pilot check and can take 1d6 hours to perform, but of course the pilot can take their time to lower the difficulty, and like with any other regular task, game masters can probably skip rolling for this each and every time they do it after the first 1 or 2 times they roll it. Yeah, flying out to a gas giant is pretty cool and all, but ship's fuel is just hydrogen, which means if the travelers can get to some water, like a comet or a lake or something like that, they could just pull that in and crack the hydrogen out. Of course, all the fish guts and the fuel filters might wear them out pretty quickly. Speaking of replacing filters, let's talk about ship's maintenance. How's that for a segue? Every ship has a monthly maintenance cost. The more expensive the ship, the higher the maintenance cost is going to be. Maintenance is a regular theme in science fiction, with our heroes constantly fixing their starships. And the longer the traveler neglects their maintenance on their ship, the higher the chance of problems is going to be. For every month that they fail to maintain their ship, they roll 2d6 and add 1 for every month since their last maintenance occurred. If it comes to an 8 or higher, they suffer a critical hit, damaging one of their ship's components. This might be a minor inconvenience or a life-threatening disaster that leaves them stranded. Another huge cost is life support. For each stateroom on a ship and each passenger that's on the ship, there is a monthly cost involved. This entails air filters, food, water, toilet paper, Q-tips, whatever else that keeps you alive. Now, while it does make sense to have life support costs, and I do like that they give us the mechanics to calculate this, I'll be honest that for my game, we just totally ignore this. The reason being is that when we're doing a job in a game and we're rolling up all the cargo and all the passengers and we're paying the mortgage and the maintenance and the berthing fees and the fuel and all that stuff, we just found that the added cost of life support is what kind of pulled this into tedious for us, and it stopped being as fun because this was just one extra thing that we had to calculate. So our house rule in our game is that the life support costs are actually all just rolled into your normal maintenance fees, and we don't do life support as a separate thing. I can see why a lot of groups would love having this rule, but for me, I see it as a lot of the way that a lot of groups do encumbrance in various role-playing games, where you just kind of ignore it unless somebody out there is abusing it, in which case you can always bust that out if they keep abusing that. Or instead of ignoring it altogether, a game master could kind of find a compromise or middle ground and use part of it. Say something like the standard occupancy for your ship is 2 people per stateroom, and it's all covered under maintenance if you're only keeping, 2 people per stateroom. But if they start cramming 4 or more people in a room, that's when we're going to have to calculate the life support cost as the difference. Like I said, I like that it's there in case we need it, or in case we decide to do a campaign where we're really just deep diving into all the little details because we're hauling a bunch of refugees and food and water are growing scarce. That's when we might bust this out, but otherwise we just ignore it. Okay, so we've gone over all the incredible costs of having a ship. So now let's ask the big question. How do you pay for all this? Well, there's asteroid mining, locating and salvaging derelict starships. We'll cover passenger and trade in a different video as I've mentioned, and those are all huge income streams. If your ship is traveling from one world to another for whatever reason it is, and you have available staterooms or available cargo space, then go ahead and fill those up because that is a lot of free money that you're leaving on the table. Because cargo and trade is such a big deal in the Traveller universe, so is piracy, and Traveller's largest campaign is the Pirates of DRINAX, which is all about playing space pirates and getting rich. But the biggest moneymaker you're going to find is jobs, and travelers can get hired to do all sorts of adventures across the galaxy, and patrons can pay big bucks for travelers to do missions for them. But as the travelers' costs go up, they might find themselves having to turn down certain jobs that just don't pay enough, or they better learn how to negotiate their prices a bit better. They also might find themselves accepting some really sketchy jobs that they don't want to take, but, the money's good and they got parts falling off their ship and debt collectors hunting them down. While they're on the job, they might be able to carry some passengers or some cargo. They might find some really cool equipment or treasure while they're doing this job, or even, salvage that rival starship that they had to destroy in the course of doing the job. Pretty much all the normal ways that player characters make money in RPGs, you can make money in Traveller, just, in space. Now, depending on your campaign, many of those costs might not even be a factor for you. If the characters own their ship outright or have it on loan, that means they don't have to make any mortgage payments on it. Or if you're doing a naval campaign, or they're all just part of a crew of a big capital ship out there, the player characters might not have to deal with any of that little stuff because, that's Ensign Ricky's job. But for most Traveller players, getting the money to pay the costs is a huge part of the game's plot. And if a group doesn't want to deal with all that and just focus on the adventure itself, maybe the game master could give them a patron that just has fully hired them and they own the ship and they handle all the costs for it, and they just sends the travelers out on missions. Or you can just choose to ignore or modify some of these rules however you like. It's all up to you as far as what you think is fun. Well, that is it for this episode. It went on a lot longer than I originally envisioned, and I only skimmed the surface of a few parts of it, but it should hopefully give a good foundation for players to then build upon. While I'd hoped to cover passengers and trade in the next video, as I started organizing it, I realized that it's best that we go over world creation rules first, especially as far as how to read the universal world profile, and it's going to be a while before we get to the world creation video, so it's going to be a while before we get to passengers and trade. The next video in the series is we're going to cover space combat. Pew, pew. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of this series or some of our other videos, such as game reviews or how-tos, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, travelers, you have a great day. What I think would be a great adventure is that one of the travelers owns a 25% stake in some ship that's out there. But that other crew, they stop making payments on the ships. The travelers got to hunt them down and get their money or get their ship back. But once they find them, that other crew's all like, no, you are not taking our ship from us, and a space battle ensues. And now the travelers running around yelling at their own crewmates going, whoa, stop blowing holes in my ship!